Good afternoon, everyone. How you doing? My name's Callum Wilson. A life lesson. When Rory Alsop says, hey, what are you going to talk about? Make sure that your commas actually leave a separate line between the name of your talk, because actually the name of the talk is just the first line. And the second and third line of the talk heading were actually things I put into the email afterwards. But we thought we'd let it stick. Number 6 is actually quite dull. So my name's Callum Wilson. I've been working in security for longer than I care to remember. There are people in this audience who I worked with 3 decades ago. Not quite 30 years, but almost there. And I'm going to talk to you about the top 10 devices found in UK homes. But I want to know a bit about you. So this is going to be a show of hands. Everyone has to take part. Hands up who works or studies in academia. Right, I'm counting. Yeah, quite a lot. Who works in government? That's the spooks sorted out. Thank you. And who works in sort of corporate, big enterprise, that type of stuff? Yeah, okay, quite a lot. Okay, that's interesting. That's going to become relevant in a minute. So we start with this number. Is that the average day rate for a consultant in Edinburgh? Is that the number of Internet of Things devices? See, you were listening. No, it's not. Actually, that is a value in dollars, and that's the total amount that Gartner predict will be spent in security in 2019. Seems quite a lot, and they've actually done their sums on this. They've been working through every year, counting up, using accounting records to say that basically, application security, $2.4 billion, cloud, $500 million, data security, and they're measuring how these things change through the years as well. And then the consultants get $64 billion. I've probably paid some consultants $64 billion. And even what I love about Gartner, even though they're doing estimates, they still have other. What on earth that's for? It's only $2.2 billion down the back of the sofa. But it's the last figure that I want to draw your attention to, and that's consumer security, $6.6 billion. And it sounds like a lot of money, but it isn't. Basically, consumers are screwed. If you work that out, it's about 90 cents per consumer for 2019. And at the end of the day, who are we actually protecting? All the rest of this is protecting the corporation or the governmental entity or academic institution. There's not a lot actually protecting the consumer. Another number, 500. And this is the last of the research numbers, don't worry. We're going to come on some real data in a minute. By 2022, Gartner predicted they would have 500 smart devices in the home. That seems like quite a lot, because I can tell you today that actually the real numbers are that on average for each of those different geographical areas. And you're going to say, Callum, how do you know this stuff? How do you actually know this? So Gartner went out with a clipboard. They worked out the number of 500 devices in the home. They've done research to work out how much we're spending in IT security. These are real numbers. This is what I'm presenting you today. So everything in the rest of this pack is real data that's come from a system that we put together. So basically, a few years ago, we thought, how are we going to work out what are people actually running in their home? So we thought of different ways about doing this, and really it came down to an app. So we put together this app. It's called Secure Smart. I'm not going to be talking too much about the app, but I want to show you where all the data came from, so I can tell you what the top 10 things found in smart homes is. Number 6 is too dull to mention. Essentially, we provide an app, customers download the app, they use it on their telephone, it identifies devices, and no, it doesn't use Nmap. We had to build something a bit more unique to actually find things. Nmap actually is not very good at finding devices on the network, would you believe? And it provides results. As you can see, this is actually my home here. Netgear GS724 is an absolutely terrible bit of equipment with loads of CVEs, probably best not to have in the home. And the idea being is that a consumer would run this and you get an idea about what's good and bad actually in your home, and you get some advice and guidance about what actually you're going to do next. And it's written in such a way that the normal consumer can use. None of you are normal, by the way, in that category. So do I junk it? Do I update it? Where's the manual? All that sort of stuff. So, data. The byproduct of this system is that to get a free app, we ask consumers to consent to us just knowing what actual devices they have in their home network. We don't ask who you are. We're not interested in that. We simply say, if you've got a Netgear GS724T in your home, we'd just like to know that you have. So, oh my God, data. And you've heard all this, data's the new oil and all that sort of thing. Data's not really the new oil. Data is the new petrol with some flammable liquid around it. So in our data model, and this will become important when we start going through the top 10 things, number 6, remember, each device has what we call a personality. A personality is built up from its network fingerprint and also its behavior. So if you have a Samsung smart cooker, then it's probably going to be switched on during meal times. If you have a set-top box, it's probably switched on all the time. If it's a child's toy, it's probably switched on when the child is actually using it. But basically, behavior is about the way we use devices. Fingerprint is about what does it look like. And from that, we can start working out what the top 10 things in a smart home are. So starting off, number 10. This is like those things you see on Channel 4 late at night. You just can't stop watching. Number 10 is music devices. In the lead is Sonos. They have a great set of hardwired music devices. The Play One, I think it is. Roku come in at number 2 with their streaming stick. And if you're a YouView watcher, you've probably got one, which are just rebranded Roku devices. And then things like Yamaha provide musical equipment, so if you're jamming, you can plug it into your network and do all the things that you need to do. What's properly interesting about this is some of these products do things that you wouldn't expect. And we picked this up in our data, was one of these. Now, I've very badly tried to pixelate the name of this device, but it's a high-end audio receiver. It's designed to have really good sound quality from a 4K TV with all the proper sound system. It's a Blu-ray player and does a lot of things. But the actual model is not important. The manufacturer of this device probably used the same software across all of them. But something interesting we found about this, and it does some really unusual things. So the first thing we did was look at the manual, like you should. Of course, we all read the manual, don't we? No. It was a 290-page manual, and I read the whole thing, I can tell you. You plug it into your network, and it can get your Spotify list. It can do all the sort of things you'd expect it to do. It's all very good. I don't really know why there's a laptop in that picture, but there is. And it's when you start to look at things like that are in the manual, think, these guys have built a network-connected device, but don't really understand it. And it all came about because our scanning product showed that this was actually running a web server, port 80, with no authentication. And you may say, well, who cares? I would care if you turn it up to 11 in the middle of the night and start playing howling noises or whatever through someone's home. And you've got to remember that we're talking about consumers here rather than the corporate marketplace. This is where people live. This is where we all live. You own your home. You don't want to feel targeted inside your home. Interestingly, this particular one had 5 stars in What Hi-Fi, and I'll give somebody £1 if they can find any What Hi-Fi report that has less than 4 stars. But interesting, of all those pages, they never thought to say this had an open web server, and it wasn't even clear what it was used for. It was just part of the software package. But it was new in 2014. When I buy things at home, like my fridge or my cooker, they last for years and years and years. And what our data shows, and we'll reflect this in the talk, is that when people buy things at home and they work really well, we just keep them. And from a security point of view, things get a bit old. I was about to say the name of the manufacturer. Will the manufacturer who built this, will they keep that up to date? Actually, the answer is no for this one. That firmware hasn't been available for years. Number 9, casting devices. We've all got them. That is the original Chromecast audio. They sold about 50% more Chromecast version 2s. But what's quite interesting is the Chromecast 1 has 69% of the install base. Now, what do I mean by that? I'm pretty sure that if you go to Google and say, how many Chromecasts did you sell? They're going to say, we actually sold more Chromecast audios than we did Chromecast version 1s. But because our scanning app is scanning what's actually running in people's homes and not in the top drawer, everyone's got stuff in the top drawer or bottom drawer, filing cabinet of all that old stuff they don't use anymore. This is what's actually running. This is what becomes important, because when you talk about the attack surface of a smart home, it's what's running today, not what's running, what was running yesterday or what's switched off and not being used. Funny enough, actually, we provide advice and guidance on the Chromecast V1 because even though it's actually a really well-built tool with great updates, and it's a fabulous casting device, it does allow users to cast without any authentication. And anyone with a child below the age of 9, you probably had Chromecast wars in your home where it's versus, news versus Peppa Pig or something, and it keeps being taken over, certainly in my home anyway. But when you're searching through networks, you start to see all sorts of data. And so I thought I'd just open the lid a little bit on what we see. So trying to identify devices on a network is really hard. Anyone who's done that in the corporate environment, even with the greatest CMDB, it's really, really difficult to work out what everything is. And for us, because we're scanning consumer homes, we have to do a reasonable amount of I call it guesswork, but if there's any investors in the audience, we call it machine learning. And so here you go. Here's an example. When you're trying to detect, what Google's back catalog is, obviously you can see there's a gap there, and that's the scoring is the blue numbers down the right-hand side. We use a sort of Bayesian scoring probabilistic matching mechanism to work out what things actually are. In this example, you can see the MAC addresses. A MAC address is just a unique number that's assigned to every networking device. At least you hope it's unique. And the IEEE, who are the Institution of Electronic Engineers, something like that, they actually register the MAC block large, which is the first 3 octets of the MAC address. And as a manufacturer, you're then permitted to use that MAC address, and then you can work out how you number everything in your manufacturing process. It's not always as easy as that. Sometimes you get things like this. So in one network, we spotted 3 consecutive MAC addresses. That's like winning the lottery 3 times over. Oh, I see. Actually, they're fake. They're fake MAC addresses. VMware is virtual computers, and it's basically just assigning its own MAC addresses. And VMware will have some sort of knowledge of the network it's in to make sure it doesn't assign 2 MAC addresses to the same device. Because if anything happened like that, you're in all sorts of trouble. In fact, I've got a Nintendo Wii, old school, with an Ethernet adapter. And it has the MAC address AABBCC112233. So if I had 2 of them in my network, all sorts of chaos would ensue. My ARC table would be knackered, and things would stop working in weird and wonderful ways. You also get some other unusual things. Private. What's private? That's not a company I know. Well, actually, it is for certain members of the audience. The private is where a company has registered with the IEEE that they don't want to be known who they are. It's a very strange situation. You have to pay a little bit extra to get this. One of those is an Argos Tablet, £50 Argos tablet. God knows why they bothered spending the extra money to register as a private company with the IEEE. And that means that actually these things are very hard to detect. And you can clearly see some from similar manufacturers. 10.AE60 is a manufacturer that we haven't identified yet. It could well be this is test equipment. So if you've got a test lab, and you're making the brand new version of a TV or a PlayStation 5 or whatever, you might register it as private to begin with, and then go on to, Sony Entertainment Limited or whatever. Sometimes you just get things like this, and that's just not helpful, guys. You get total fake MAC addresses, and anyone who's hacked into an 802.1x network with network address control in your corporation will know how easy it is to spoof MAC addresses. We actually have seen this, and we think someone was mucking around with our heads. So network-attached storage. It's actually really difficult to detect what is network-attached storage in the home. So this pie chart, wakey, it's after lunch. shows that 50% of all our scanned networks have either FTP, SFTP, or SMB running, or I should really say SCP running. That's what we say is network attached storage. It's quite high, and I think that's because a lot of people don't actually realize they're running it. So we see where there is network attached storage running a network, 14% FTP, 53% SMB, that's probably your Windows laptops with things switched on, potentially a network attached storage device, and 33% SSH running SCP, and so on. What gets quite interesting is when you start merging it together, and you start seeing devices that are running all three. So 2% of all network attached storage, what we're classifying as NASs, actually run all three. And that's a bit strange, because why would you run FTP and SSH together? Or why would you run SSH and SMB? It's not always absolutely clear. We think most consumers don't realize and just ticked all the boxes and left these things all completely open. And of course, two of those protocols are in clear text, and certainly older SMB, which is Windows file sharing, for those who don't know, actually will transmit passwords or the hashes of passwords in the clear. Broadcasting. Now, of those, there's different types of ways of detecting things in a home network. So obviously, finding FTP, SSH, and SMB, you can look at what ports are open on a device. You start to learn about that device. But also, some devices, you do the equivalent of, hey, who's got SMB on the network? And then 6% of them will come back and say, hey, I've got SMB. And by the way, here's all the information in order to connect. And this is using protocols like MDNS. MDNS is like a handy helper in the network. It's trying to help you configure things. So you have a mobile app that needs to connect to something, then the device itself will say, hey, this is how you connect to me. Again, great for hacking networks if you're into that sort of thing, because you no longer, if you did a port scan, typically you'd be picked up as a port scan and blocked by any sensible networking equipment. But if you use broadcast addressing, everything just tells you what it is. You don't even need to do any work. And we like that. We're lazy. Yeah, security conference. You can't put a black armor on a black background. But this black armor NAS, we've seen a few of these. It's not massively, we don't see huge numbers of these running across the world, but there are a number, and they have there's really bad CVEs. So a CVE is a common vulnerability exposure. We've talked a little bit about that this morning, some of the other talks. They have a score associated with them called a CVSS. Common vulnerability scoring system. Essentially, if you've got a 10.0, it means that device is going to get totally owned. It means it can be owned as administrative access from a network without any physical access to the device. And that's storing all your files. A lot of the older, this particular Black Armor NAS is from about 2012, 2013, but people are still running them today because they still work. It's in the home. It's not like a corporate SAN policy or storage policy where you recycle devices over a period of time. But I've got perimeter security. Now this, starting to think, well, wait a minute, this is interesting. So what we're saying here is homes are almost like our workplaces were a few years ago. Quite like a turtle, thick outer shell, soft, mushy interior. It's going to be no excuse. We'll talk a bit more about that later. So number 7, home automation, my favorite. For any of you who've not seen Mr. Robot, this is at the beginning of series 2, where the hacker group F Society, I've got the t-shirt, are trying to hack into this fancy flat that has full automation, blinds, the garage door, the lights, the media center, and cooker, hot water, everything. And they're taking over this lady's house, and basically she's on the phone to clearly whoever provided this equipment. She says, what am I supposed to do? Unplug what? But everything's inside the walls. That's how it was when I installed and bought the home package. And we've seen a bit of this with home automation. The first version of the Honeywell controllers for central heating had a pretty serious bug with absolutely no way of updating it. And you think, well, it's not that expensive, just replace it. And then you think, well, I've got to call out a heating engineer, have no heating, no hot water whilst they do that. And then I've got to make a decision whilst the thing is broken about whether I could heat my family or move out of the house. So these things can have quite big ramifications in the world of of home automation. The marketplace, in terms of what we see running today, is roughly that. The bigger the circle, the more we see of them. These are the big guys. Nest have had some problems, and in fact, they've all had problems in the past, pretty much now fixed. They've got big companies behind them. Most of them have good disclosure processes, and they have pen tests being operated. But interestingly, they've all had problems. The Nest one was because people were guessing passwords, but also they had some problems with the Nest cameras, where there was the crack, K-R-A-C-K, hack on them, and there's a few other bits and pieces. We don't see so many lightwave systems because all you're really seeing is the hub. And lightwave use a radio frequency, lightwave RF, to be able to connect out to all your light switches and so on. An interesting new entrant into the arena is IKEA. IKEA has a £25 home sort of hub thing. And it's really interesting what the play is going to be there. Are they going to start moving into the home automation? So you just pick up your home automation stuff when you go to buy wooden furniture? I don't know. It looks like it's going to be that way. But Philips and Nest are really, we see a lot of these actually running today in networks. It's not all good like that, though. Not this fella. We saw this in Berlin at the IFA show, which is like the CES for Europe. It's an enormous conference where they show off all the latest devices. And this is Mikey. And this is a consortium that's been led by Siemens, who showed off this new device that basically would integrate your fridge, cooker, and new sort of kitchenware type devices. And the sort of questions you could ask is, based on what I have in my fridge, what can I cook for myself tonight? And but the scariest thing about Mikey is that the head arrangement had you can sort of see it's winking at us in that right-hand picture, but it had a whole set of facial expressions. And as you walk past Mikey, the head would turn around and face you. Pretty scary stuff. So scary that when I tried to buy one, it's never made it to market. Thank the Lord. Number 6. Do you remember? It's just too dull. Nah, we're going to cover number 6. Number 6, they are the ancients of home networking. They're the old school, the very first things that were connected to home networks, and these are the printers. The printers. Printers are great. I love printers. Printers you just connect to them, they print whatever you tell them to print. They don't ask you for anything, they just print. They also are really easy to spot using network scanning techniques because they tell you everything. They tell you all sorts of information. Here's some MDNS scans here where the Ricor, which is that's Africo, is quite a big sort of multifunction printer that someone's got. But interestingly, that's the red oblong on the right-hand side. It actually has its serial number, which it presents to you for free when you ask for it. Say, broadcast, tell me everything about PDL data stream. Oh, you can have my serial number. And the serial number is all you need to register that at Ricor's website. And then you can start doing all sorts of things. You can take control of the printer because it has a cloud function to it. You can start ordering lots of new toner, and you can reject print jobs. You can make it do things. Other little things like the bottom one, that HP Envy, which is a sort of a home class printer, redisplays its MAC address in MDNS, where at the moment isn't such a big deal because you've got the MAC address anyway if you're on the network. But if you're using sort of modern Apple iOS devices that prevent you having being able to scan networks, so in case you didn't know, Apple changed the rules on iOS about 2 years ago and said that we're no longer going to allow any application to scan networks, except for their own, which you have to pay for. So tools like ours and like Fing and like some of the other network scanning products simply don't work on Apple iOS anymore. But you can still get the information because things like printers are giving you that information. You also get some interesting things. So the middle two there, it says HP Envy 5530 at Simon's iMac, and that's because they've connected in a USB printer into a iMac in this case, and it's and the computer's acting as the server for the printer. That got me thinking. So I did a quick search just the other evening across our database, and we found hundreds and hundreds of these. So broadcast network scanning, your devices start telling the world about who they are. And in this case, quite a lot of people like to, for some reason, when they've got the Apple device, like to put their name on it, say who it belongs to. And Apple are quite happy to tell everyone who that name is. So in your home, it's not such a big deal. But outside, if you're in an airport lounge or if you're browsing from public Wi-Fi, then people can start building up this picture about you. And I'm hoping that you start to see that the information that we use for home scanning can be equally applied to public networks, to your corporate network, to your academic network at university. And by the way, people put their full names in this. I just redacted that just in case. There's a very small likelihood Joe's in this audience, and my luck sometimes works like that. But yeah. Toys and games. You remember Ken Monroe at previous conferences was talking about, my friend Kayla and a View robot and that sort of thing. I think that actually what happened was that this started to change the way the industry works. And we work with a company called Wow Stuff. And you think, I've never heard of Wow Stuff. I buy toys for my kids. Wow Stuff's the third biggest designer and manufacturer of toys, and they do toys for Science Museum and all sorts of really cool stuff. And we've been talking to them about a sort of compliance package for toys, making sure that they're safe and they meet the same sort of criteria we would have on corporate assets in a company network. And really the way it works is like this. And I think that some of the findings from the My Friend Kayla fiasco a couple of years ago has started to change this model. And it's really important to say, in any security problem you have, either whether it's home scanning like us or whether you're scanning corporate networks, say, who is responsible? And it's actually not clear-cut in the toy industry. You've got retailers, the person who sold you, I don't care, they sold it to you. The distributors do have an insurance bond in case things get set on fire or choking hazards for toys, but not really responsible for firmware updates or for keeping things fresh or for being able to handle disclosure events. So you go back to the toy designers. And toy design is really interesting because basically right today, they are not designing toys for this Christmas or the Christmas after. Right now, they're designing the toys that we will see in our stockings in 2021. So they're looking very far ahead. So by the time that you buy that toy or Santa delivers it, there will be nobody there to be able to answer the question, to be able to deal with the disclosure, to be able to update the firmware. They are long gone. And really when you start to say, well, okay, I don't really know who's responsible, who's going to have the biggest loss? You look at the licensors. And the licensors are who really rule the industry in the toy industry. They are the, Barbie from Mattel and the Pixar and Disney. With a few exceptions like Lego and Matchbox and some of the other brands as well. But the licensors hold all the weight. And they will massively lose. Imagine if the My Friend Kayla doll was a well-known and well-recognized brand like Action Man or Barbie or whatever. It would have crucified them. I can't remember the name of the company of My Friend Kayla. I think it was called like MediaCom or something like that. I can't remember. But they had 1,000 people working for them. There was a $100 million enterprise that no longer exists. But the licensors are a factor of 100 bigger than that. So there's been a bit of an ease. And what you'll see today is a lot of the toys and games that are smart typically are Bluetooth connected through another device as a proxy device. So we don't see very many, in our scanning database, we don't see so many directly connected devices, but we're working with the next generation of toys, which are absolutely brilliant. But I can't tell you anything about them. It's sworn to secrecy. We do see PlayStations, Xboxes, and the odd Nintendo that's connected. What's quite interesting is we see a lot more PlayStation 4s than anything else. That's largely because they're switched on all the time. Even when you switch them off, they keep the network card running. And that's quite common amongst other devices, such as set-top boxes and so on. And obviously your home router stays on all the time. But some devices will go into sleep mode. The Xbox sleeps from time to time. So we see Xboxes when they're switched on. Mostly Xbox One rather than some of the older versions. PlayStation 3s have got CVs against them, which not a lot of people knew, which I don't think have been fixed. Number 4, TVs and set-top boxes. I hope you like my Amazon bar graph. Amazon reached the UK and Europe after a while. It took a few years before they launched here. So our database shows things that are actually running today. The first products, the TV Cube and the TVs, Fire TV, were mostly launched and mostly used by customers in the USA. I'm sure there's a few early adopters here that might have bought one. So the Fire TV sticks 1 and 2 massively outnumber those. But again, it's kind of like the Chromecast. You've got the older version of the device has way more actually out there. So if you start looking about the attack surface of Amazon Fire TV sticks, it's more the old version than the new version. Even if someone says, but my device is totally up to date, it's patched. What about the old versions? They're still running today. So what's the responsibility for the whoever's maintaining these devices to be able to stay with them? Because at the end of the day, there's not much in terms of regulation for maintaining things once you've bought them. Just for interest's sake, this is a bar graph of things that are actually running. All types of Chromecast are we have vastly more running instances of Amazon Fire stuff than Google Chromecast. I know that they're not quite both casting devices. They do slightly different things, but just for interest's sake. But that's not the only thing that can run media streams. Set-top boxes and TVs. Right, so, wakey, hands up. Who connects their TV directly to the internet through Wi-Fi or Ethernet? All right, okay, you all spread out, and I can sort of see it's about a quarter. Who connects a set-top box, whether it's a Skybox, a Humax, or a UView? Right, it's kind of 50-50. That's kind of ruined my whole slide, so thanks for that. Should have been paying more attention. We actually see 3 times the amount running set-top boxes than we do televisions, although we accept that we've got to do some work on that, and that's probably because the TVs weren't all switched on at the time, whereas a set-top box has to be switched on for its PVR capability to run. So if you program for EastEnders at 7:30, it has to be switched on and ready to be able to record. Across the world, we see B-Sky or Sky boxes, but they come in various flavors. The Australian ones show up exactly the same when we look at them in our using our scanning techniques to the UK ones. I guess it's the same company behind the scenes. Pace and Aris and a few others manufacture the devices on behalf of Sky. So we see the same sort of things. You see Humaxes, which is replacement satellite boxes. ISP TV is sort of like, there seems to be a whole bunch of new ISPs, particularly in Europe, that are packaging TV deals with so if you're a Sky customer or a Virgin Media, you probably got this. You probably get some sort of media package or an extra box that gets plugged in. Kodi. So everyone runs Kodi, but doesn't tell anyone. But Kodi, we can detect Kodi running on Raspberry Pis or whatever people are running on. But obviously, part of our app is to say to consumers, give them advice and guidance if something's not quite good. It doesn't mean there's just a vulnerability. You could say, actually, this particular device can go on fire. And there's a database that's curated, I think, by the DCMS, Department of Culture, Media and Sport, that says anything that has a hazard. And that particular Kodi box had some sort of fire hazard, although I would warn that the sun isn't a great thing to cite. But it's the first one I could find on Google. And also this was actually written by the Anti-Piracy Alliance, so they might have had some skin in the game about this particular article. But that's the cool thing about identifying devices on a network. Suddenly you can start to work out things like, hey, how much power has been consumed? How much is it worth? What could you replace it with? What vulnerabilities there are? Is it going to go on fire? But that's okay, because I don't run set-top boxes. I plug my TV directly into the internet, so I'm safe. Actually, I'm not. My TV listens to me. It's the only thing that listens to me. I think this was actually mentioned in one of the earlier things. I won't go too much into it, but Samsung on page 129 of their license terms and conditions said, don't have private conversations in front of your TV. All I can say is that in my house, some poor bloke in Samsung must be thinking, what on earth is going on in there? But how does a consumer know this? Who's telling them this? You can get some exciting report in BBC News or in The Sun or whatever, but really, there's no one really looking out for the consumer. They are screwed. 3 smart plugs. So we're getting into the top 3 here. This is where it gets exciting. I bet you're all guessing. Wonder what number 1 is. Okay. I did a bit of research on smart plugs. This is the smart plug in my house. Apologies, the picture's a bit dirty. I didn't even clean it before I took the picture. I can never really work out how these things work because I can use my phone, which is not connected to my Wi-Fi, push the button and the light would immediately come on. I think, how can it go that fast? And I've built big enterprise systems before, and usually there's some sort of latency, and you switch it on, off. I can do it from here. I started to think, how on earth does this work? So rewiring my home a little and using some Wireshark, this is how it works. What they do is when they power up, they send a DNS query outside of your network to a specific DNS server in the cloud. That then responds with the details of an AWS renter server. Now, I actually bought this plug. It came free with an Amazon. I paused there because I can't say the word Alexa in my home because suddenly she wakes up and, see, I just called it a she. We have big arguments. The favorite thing in our house is Alexa, stop. But it came free with an Amazon Echo device. Voice assistant speaker, and I've always, since ever watching Star Trek as a youngster, always wanted to be able to make my lights to come on through a voice command. It's a thing. I wanted it. And this plug came basically free, and I think you could buy them for less than $5. So the cloud responds, so the DNS server responds with the details on AWS renter server. And this is not Amazon branded. I think this one was called Lombax, I think. It then makes a long-lived TCP connection out to that server and just stays on. And if you power off the switch, the actual plug itself, it then just reconnects afterwards. It just stays on all the time. And that's how it works. Because when you are then using the app, there's a picture of the app. Basically what it's doing is it's connecting to the cloud system, which has a long-lived permanent or semi-permanent connection to the cloud. And that's how it does it. But you start to ask a few questions. How on earth how does that work in terms of, I got that plug from pretty much free, or I could buy it for £5, and I've had it for 4 years already. Who's paying for that Amazon renter server? Is it Amazon? Maybe because they're selling more Alexa devices. Who is it? And also, why is it that when I put that little image on the right, with just a screenshot from my phone, did a Google search images on it, I found about 50 exactly the same from all different companies. There's something going on here they don't fully understand. And I think that basically there's a B2B play in these plugs. But what I can't work out is, and this is still to be figured out, I think that basically there is some sort of kickback scheme happening, or potentially that plug is telling its lords and masters more about my network than perhaps I know about or I've consented to. But we see quite a few of these. We see different ones, and obviously this is a generic brand with a brand you've never heard of. And there are some better ones and there's some worse ones, I imagine, too. But here's the thing. From a security perspective, if I hack that AWS renter server, which I now know the name of, and let's face it, I've never heard of any Amazon servers ever been hacked. I could have control of all this power across the energy grid. I could switch things on and off. I could burn down a nuclear power plant. Well, I couldn't, but, you could have a sort of critical national infrastructure problem if you could, across the world as well. So, really interesting. And I think there's a long way to go. I'm fully expecting that Smartplug to stop working one day when those Amazon bills stop getting paid. But it doesn't tell you that when you buy it. It never mentions anything about connecting out to another server in order for it to work. Of course it wouldn't. Number 2, CCTV. All-seeing eye. CCTV, they're great devices in the home network. We did some research last year and presented Cyber UK last year and IITSF last year, where we did a correlation of people with CCTV cameras and found that we tried to work out the average value of the products in their home network, and found that people with Apple Mac equipment tend more likely to have CCTV equipment, but also more likely to have really bad quality CCTV equipment. So your classic security theater. So how do you work out what CCTV is? Well, firstly, you look at some protocols like real-time streaming protocol. It's a protocol born of the 1980s. It has functions such as play, fast forward, rewind, record. So anyone who's under the age of 35 has got no idea what I'm talking about. And it's a protocol that has essentially optional security, which when I mean optional, in most of the retail products that we see in the home scans, no one's got passwords on this stuff. It's just completely open. And we've all heard about Showdown. We might even had a wee peek at Showdown.ru, which is a website that shows people's cameras, and you can see people's backyards or worse. But they're just the people who've done something nutty enough to export or do port forwarding through their home router. But inside the home, all this data is available. So if you drop another device in there that's a bad device or it's been hacked, you suddenly get access to all the stuff I've been talking about. So RTSP, it's really easy to detect and to be able to see the video feeds. And for you, it depends what that camera's pointing at. Your risk appetite will be different to mine. Yours may be facing the garden. You don't really care. Mine might be a baby monitor, in which I do care. But consumers don't know this stuff. Some of the better ones use custom broadcast techniques. Some use UPnP, which I'm not really going to cover too much in this presentation, but it operates in a very simple way where you say, hey, UPnP devices, tell me what you are, and they come back with a massive configuration, including everything you need to connect to them. Kind of similar to MDNS and Axis, which are a very major manufacturer of CCTV cameras, mostly for the corporate marketplace. Do this properly, obviously, and they use MDNS. Oh, damn it. There we go. Some run HTTP servers. I like the one called Net Surveillance. They start to work out. These HTTP servers tend to be HTTP and not HTTPS. Allows you to change the AMRA, point, tilt, zoom, and do all sorts of things with people's cameras, should you wish. But there's always one, isn't there? There's always somebody. What's the OWASP top 10? Never build your own security. Well, we found one actually, a CCTV camera that somebody clearly didn't put together properly and is still running the basic IIS through it. Fantastic. These are just, you're not reading it, just look for the red dots. These are just some CVEs from the very handy website cvedetails.com. We looked up just 3 manufacturers, and these are reasonably big manufacturers. We see quite a lot of them across various smart homes. Just count the red blobs. The 3 at the bottom and one of the ones in the middle is a 10.0. In other words, totally owned. And these ones were mostly code execution vulnerabilities. If you remember Mirai took advantage of this and was able to install its own firmware and then be part of a botnet. And of course, CCTV cameras are great. They've got some attributes. They've got big CPUs because they're running 4K video. They've got amazing network interfaces and very handy if you want to denial of service Krebs on security, as it turned out. So these ones go back just a couple of years for 3 manufacturers. Imagine what it's like for all the CCTV devices that are not even in the NIST National Vulnerability Database with all the other CVEs. And another finding from this, and take this away, is that the CVE databases don't really include much in the way of home IoT or home devices. Number 1, the worst device in the home is also the one we rely on for security, home routers. So whenever you're thinking about a device, think about attack surfaces. It's just scary to think that 62% of home routers don't even run HTTPS. It's scarier to think that 10% of them run Telnet. And I love the ones on 2323. Hey, if we run it on 2323, no one will think it's Telnet, but it actually is. Some of them got open management protocols like CWMP, and a few have LDAP for some weird reason, which I can only imagine is someone scanned their workplace. I can tell you after a drink about what people have actually scanned. But we can also tell how old things are. And this is a graph that shows the last firmware date for devices that we see. And you think, actually, that's not too bad, Callum. You know, quite a lot of them were patched in 2018, less than a year away. But this is about the actual manufacturers. If we look about what's actually running in people's homes, we get a very different picture. We get that. And what's happening there is there was a bump in the curve when a lot of UK cities and towns went into ADSL2 and were given routers. And so if you look at the area under the graph around 2014 to 2016, there's a huge number of home routers that were probably supplied by the ISP that are just old and not being patched. And this is the sole security device we have in the home, typically. And then if you take part the other 9 categories of things I've just been talking about and all the problems with them, you start to think, well, wait a minute, we've got a problem here. People's homes are operating at too much risk. Security 15 years ago in companies, and most of you put your hands up to say you worked in companies, had these 4 major problems. There was reliant, and by the way, I apologize. If you're actually facing these today, you've got bigger problems in your company. If you're reliant on perimeter security, lack of encrypted protocols inside the network, unmaintainable outbound connections, and patching compliance is pretty much non-existent. The problem we see today is actually that is also in homes today. And there's no one there to look out for the consumer. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed the insight into UK homes. Have you got any questions? I thought someone was going to say, what's running in my home?
So what's the single most important thing consumers can do?
Be aware. Just be aware of what you're actually running. Information is just knowing what you actually have in your home is really important. And that's what our app actually tries to do, is give the consumer some advice, because what you want to do with a particular bad device in your home will be different to what I have, because we have different risk appetites. You may have young children in the home. I might have children who've already left to go to university or whatever, or they might be just a different profile, might be living in a flat, students. So the most important thing is just knowing and being aware of what actually, where the vulnerabilities are, what the risks are in your home. There's a QR code on it. It's actually all changed. Where is he? He's gone. So it's all happening here. So if you could put back slide 3, please, at the top there. All right, here we go. Click to click. Keep going. I'll do it. Right, okay, here we go. And that is the QR code for our app just there. It's called Secure Smart. Just search for Purple. We have a lot of purple in our branding. Yes?
The actual app, how it's got the rating on the right-hand side, how is that generated? Is that through CVs or?
Yeah, that's right. So CVS scoring is a score of 1 to 10. That's obviously a score of 1 to 100 because we felt that consumers would work a little bit better than that. We also use some configuration scoring so that if we see, for example, a router with Telnet on it, that will get points deducted from it over and above any CVEs. So, for example, the Netgear GS724 had 2 CVEs rated at 7.8, but also had Open Telnet and just basically everything wrong with it. And so it scored a really bad 0. And when you click on the button, it gives you advice and guidance about what to do next. Anyone for any more? Oh, thank you. Oh, sorry, one's up there. Yep. I trust all my devices, absolutely. No, I don't. I totally don't. I run a zero trust network at home. The problem is we've got humans live there. Apart from me, the humans also live in my home, and they like this sort of stuff. And so you make a decision in life of whether you trust the devil or not. But at least I know. You know, I can make decisions about things. If I've got some particularly sensitive work information, I can segregate my network and run it in a different way, for example. We actually had a case where somebody had a musical receiver used for plugging musical instruments in, and it had 2 network ports, and it was actually implicitly bridging 2 parts of a network together. This was somebody who worked in a sensitive environment, was trying to keep family life away from work life. So you've got to be really, really careful about what you actually run. But in terms of Amazon and there's Google, have a Google Home and Home Mini and so on. There's all sorts of voice assistant devices. You make choices in life about whether you want to trust it or not. It does do some freaky things, though. One for another talk. I think that's it. Thank you very much. Have a great day.